Check 1, 2. Is everybody ready?
And real quick, you guys, if anybody wants to take a picture of this book, this is the person who's out of the entire world, she's the one we have to thank for restoring ancient grains. And so, and she's the one that I said is Jewish, but she's secular Jew, I'm pretty sure, because she's got some pretty weird ideas and thinking in her book. But you can set that aside and listen to what she's talking about with grains. But she's the one, she went to all the seed banks over, like Bethlehem Seed Bank and all over Israel. She went to the Jericho dig, and she got some of the seeds extracted from the Jericho site. And she's responsible for bringing back our father's grains. So, and then I want to mention a couple things about yesterday's lecture. Can I say those before you start recording? You're already recording? Okay. Okay, I'll just cut the beginning off then. Okay. Alrighty.
Say your thing.
Oh, so go ahead and say it about yesterday? Okay, are you going to do it?
This is Wendy Jackson. No, all I was going to say was just to reiterate what we said yesterday, which is, we're trying to put together these events to bring freedom to people, whether it's getting out of debt, whether it's improving your health and improving your eating, gut health, all of that. So we appreciate you being here and taking the time to do this. So thank you. You guys enjoy yesterday?
It's my privilege.
Yes, me too. All right.
Awesome.
It's all you.
Okay. And I feel like I'm a little loud, a little bit of echo. Do you guys hear that or not? No? Okay. Then I'm just going to proceed. So there's a couple things I thought about later with yesterday's lecture that I wanted to add to really quick, because I think it's so cool about the Feast of the Lord and how we have the wheat feast and the barley feast and the wine feast, right? And I think it's amazing when we look at, like, I was just talking about Ellie's book and how she's basically the one responsible for helping to get einkorn and barley grown again. And einkorn is the name of the ancient wheat, but the name of the barley is Black Nile barley. Black Nile barley. And those are the original two grains that we would have been harvesting for those feast days. But the wine, I wanted to talk about that real quick. Yesterday we talked about it being a tincture, that the way wine used to be made, it would actually become a tincture, so it was like medicine. Today, the wine process is completely different. There can be 20 to 30 different chemicals used in the process, and it's not disclosed on the bottles. It's a completely different process, and if you can go back to raw fermented wild wine the way they used to do it, it was medicine. It actually took the food itself and made it more nutritious than when it was raw, which is a product of fermentation, and it preserved it like a tincture would do. So they were primarily using grapes, right? Remember when they spied out the land, they were so excited about the big size of the grapes, because they were going to use that to make wine, right? So I think this is interesting when you look at grape therapy. These are some of the main things that is used for medicine from grapes. So in the wine, they would have had polyphenols, which are just a nice collection of antioxidants, and we know antioxidants are so important to fight free radical damage and all kinds of immune-compromising issues that we have in the body. And we have this resveratrol, and I have not taught on that very much, so I looked it up real quick to see what it does. And it's also a powerful antioxidant, and it helps with anti-inflammatory issues in the body, so keeping the inflammation down. It has immunomodulatory properties, in other words, supporting the immune system. So it helps to keep your immune system strong. It helps with glucose and lipid regulatory systems, so keeping your glucose regular, your lipid, that whole thing being regulated. Helps with neuroprotective and cardiovascular protective effects, all from just that second one on the list. And then we have isothiocyanates. Those I have taught on. That's found really abundant in broccoli, and especially broccoli sprouts. And it's amazing the study that's been done on that for its effect against cancer, and preventing and treating cancer has been just phenomenal with isothiocyanates. And so that's found in the wine. It reduces blood clotting, has preventative measures for Alzheimer's, and these are all, the sightings on the bottom are all studies that were done showing this, and then also with protecting our DNA. So is that not phenomenal? So when they say historically they had bread and wine, their bread was their sustenance, right? It was the staff of life, which the definition was something that your life can safely depend upon. And then in their flask, they had their medicine. So isn't that awesome? I think that's really cool what the Father had laid out in those 3 feast days. So anyway, today we're going to get a little further, and we're going to be discussing gut health, which is foundational, and grains play a huge role in that, which you'll find out as we progress. I just want to bring up my little clock here so I can keep track of time. There we go. Oh, and also, this is the book that we got to learn how to make wine, Wild Wine Making. It's by Richard Bender, Bender, Wild Wine Making. And it's actually a very easy process. All right, so our topic today is Farming the Garden Within. I love this title because when you start learning about the gut, you start understanding it's an ecosystem, and it needs to be maintained and farmed just like you would a garden. And there's so many correlations between the two. So that's why I chose that title. Basically, we're going to talk about what is the gut, what does it do, what causes damage to your gut, how has modernization affected our gut, and what are those things? How is digestion impacted? We're going to talk about the role of fiber because that's probably the biggest key of all. And then in the end, when we talk about farming the garden within, I'm going to wrap it all up in a bow and really give you what you need to do to maintain good gut health. A nice formula to leave with at the end. Okay? Yeah. And then the very last one, are you scared? That's almost a whole nother lecture that really gets into the science behind fermentation. By then your brain's going to be done for. So I don't think I'm going to go to that other than I'll give you just the basic synopsis. What does it boil down to? Are you going to get sick if you make fermented food? Can you do it wrong? I just want to basically relieve some of your fears at the very end of this. So what is the gut? So the gut is technically everything from entry to exit all the way through. Okay, a lot of people think it's just the small and large intestine, but it's really the whole entire process. It starts immediately, and even digestion starts immediately as soon as that food enters into your mouth, and the enzymes start to work on it. It's the whole thing. And it's a pretty large system, and it should be enclosed. In other words, there's some things that can go in your mouth and come out the other end that shouldn't actually get into the rest of your body. So it makes a nice closed and tight system. I like to think of it as a planted garden, and that was actually my original viewpoint of what does this look like. So originally I thought if we took the lining of our gut and we cut it and we just rolled it open, it would look like a well-tended garden because it had lots of plants in there that were maintaining all the organisms that live in the soil. They were preventing other opportunistic plants from taking root and overtaking the garden. They were preventing soil erosion. They were just really keeping the soil nice and healthy. And that was my first initial impression of the gut. Today, I think it's a rainforest. And I'll explain that a little bit more as we go. But the gut is called our second brain, and it's actually connected. Okay, so if you begin to think negative thoughts and you let anger and other unforgiveness things settle into your heart, it's going to affect the culture and the makeup of the organisms that are thriving in your gut, and it will affect you. And the same is also true. If you are fostering a situation where the unfriendly bacteria are flourishing and your good beneficial bacteria in your gut are suffering, you might start becoming depressed or be full of anxiety or having issues with all of the brain kind of things. So they are totally connected. One fuels the other, okay? And they can help. The gut can also make decisions independent of the brain. So it's totally a really cool, interesting thing to study. So anybody who's struggling with brain issues, make sure you're focusing on the gut. We also have 10 times more bacteria cells in our gut than we have human cells. So we are 10 times more a host to other living organisms than we are our own self. So we need to pay attention to them, right? There should be 36 different thousand species of bacteria, And I say, there's other things besides bacteria, but the reason why I tend to say that is because it's primarily bacteria. Okay, that's the majority of them. Okay, that's how many should be residing inside our gut. So any guesses on how many the current U.S. population currently has? 4,000? Oh, 4 total? Well, yeah, there you go. The 4 that come in the yogurt. That's, pretty close. Well, right now we have between 300 and 1,000. Yeah. So that kind of tells you why when we study traditional diets, sometimes you think, well, they didn't have any issues and we're really struggling. Part of that is because we don't have near the species that people did historically. But I'm going to teach you how to reintroduce species into your gut as we progress. So the bacteria and all the organisms that live in our gut, if you were to take them out independent of our body and just put them on a scale, they would weigh 5 pounds. Yeah, 5 pounds. Yeah. So they weigh a lot. And these pictures, by the way, were drawn by my son when he was 8. At that time, I didn't want to spend money on Adobe stock images. So I'm like, can you just draw me some stuff? And it was great. I couldn't figure out how to draw a healthy or bacteria or a harmful bacteria, and I love what he came up with. So it worked good. See how friendly, how happy they look? And look at the unfriendly, the big old tooth. They worked great. So we should have a collection of 85 good, beneficial, friendly organisms living in our gut and about 15% unfriendly. So that means there actually is a role for the unfriendly. This is the ideal collection that we want to have. So we don't actually want 100% friendly. We need to keep parts of our body strong by working on these other ones. It's just when we get a flip-flop situation, which is called a gut dysbiosis, when you end up with more of the unfriendly thriving and surviving and having a good time and a party in your body, and the good ones are suppressed. That's when we have a problem. So out of all of these organisms that live in our gut, we just said there should be 36,000. Together, they would total around 39 trillion in their numbers. So that's a lot. No wonder they weigh 5 pounds, right? 39 trillion is a bunch. So primarily we have bacteria, we have yeast, parasites, viruses, and archaea. And there's actually some interesting recent studies coming out showing some benefit to things like viruses and things that we're like, there's still actually, it's a whole circle of life, Our Father really designed all of this to work, and we see one little thing and we get bent out of shape, and He's designed this all to work together. So we are actually a host of the circle of life. We're actually hosting more than we are ourselves, right? But I think this is kind of cool that kissing, so when you kiss your spouse, you exchange 80 million microbes. And some actually believe that might play a role into why you eventually tend to look like each other, because you're actually exchanging microbes and bacteria with each other. I don't know if there's truth to that or not. You would think your facial features would remain your facial features, but some speculate on that. But this next one I think is so cool, that 60% of our stools is bacteria cells and not the food that we ate. It's actually the bacteria cells that, their job is done. It's finished what it needed to do in our body, and out the stool it goes. Which, have you ever done fasting and you thought, why am I still pooping? I'm not eating anything, I'm fasting. Because we still have the slough off of the spent microorganisms that need to go out. But what I think is amazing is even though your body's done with them, and you go number 2 and it comes out, you can take that as a fecal transplant, put it in somebody who's dying, and it'll save their life. If they're dying from like a C. diff or some kind of a bacterial overgrowth of the harmful bacteria, it'll save their life. So isn't that cool? So when it comes out of you, there's still life in it. There's still something that will save someone else's life. Which if you look at our Father's system, that's one of the things that have gotten broken, is actually using our products to be recycled back into the garden. Our septic system is not a design that our Father created. So if you look into composting toilets in a way that you can actually take that and put it back into the soil so that we complete this circle and it's not broken anymore. When we have our training program over in Africa, like we're setting up in Liberia right now, we actually build what's called urine diverting composting toilets. And you separate the two because when you're done eating and the waste products come out, 80% of the nutrition's in the urine and 20% is in the number 2. And so that urine can actually be aged for 3 weeks. It's totally sterile. It becomes pure nitrogen fertilizer, and there's actually companies in Africa that sell it to farmers. They actually buy urine from the poor people who have no other way of getting a job or getting income. They buy their urine, they age it for 3 weeks, rebottle it, and off they sell it to farmers. Isn't that amazing? But I think it's so cool, and there's no smell once you age it the 21 days. So you want to age it without oxygen. But at the end of that, there's no smell, and it's one of the best fertilizers. And this is so cool to me. Every single person, you're a source of fertilizer, right? Every single person has the exact amount of fertilizer in their waste products to grow the exact amount of food that they would eat. And so it's like our Father has already designed it. And we got to go around and go to the system of, man, why? Because there's profit and there's money in that, in the other way. But he already had it figured out. So, and then you look at all the other cycles that are broken, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, we could go on, but I'm getting into a gardening topic and I'm supposed to be talking about the gut. So let's move on. So the majority of the imbalances, if you get an overgrowth of the harmful bacteria and the good ones are suppressed, they tend to present themselves in one of these 3. In either Candida, SIBO, which is small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, or parasites. So if you try to, yes? Mm-hmm. Right. I was just going to say that exactly. So a simple way to do it is just to go and do an online search and put top 10 symptoms of SIBO. Top 10. Huh? There's Candida, small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, and parasites. And so, yeah, those are typically the top 3 that people will experience. There's obviously others, but those are the most common. And a lot of people just, as maintenance, do a once-a-year parasite cleanse, just as maintenance. So that's an easy one, just a once-a-year, do a parasite cleanse. There's great supplements you can get for that, or there's some plant vegetation that you could do. So where I live, I can eat a 1-inch square piece of papaya leaf every day, or wormwood, artemisia. There's lots of plants that you can use as well, but you can do your research on that and figure out how to do a cleanse to keep that down. And there's some parasite infections that don't give you any symptoms, or the person's not experiencing symptoms. So it is a good thing to do on a routine, just a once-a-year thing. And then the other 2, like the Candida, you could do the same thing. You can do a search, top 10 symptoms of Candida. And there's different Candida questionnaires you can find online. Different doctors that are helping people to rebalance their gut have questionnaires online that help you determine that. But what we're going to talk about today is an approach that will work for everything. And so it's just, if you have those, then you might want to be a little bit more focused on your target. But what we're talking about today will eventually correct all imbalances. So what does a healthy gut do? It facilitates digestion and nutrient absorption. So that's probably number 1. We pretty much figured that out, right? It helps you digest your food, and it helps us get the nutrients absorbed into our body, circled by the bloodstream, distributed so we can use it. They also really help us to reduce inflammation. So some of the microbes that live inside of our gut, that's one of their jobs, is to go around putting out fires, and they help to bring the inflammation down. It also helps to protect against radiation and pollutants, which is great because a lot of times you can't help but be subjected to these things. So if you have a good, healthy microbiota, then this will help combat those in your life. They prevent yeast, fungal, and harmful overgrowth. So anybody know what these are a result of those 3 infections? Which one would it be? Candida. Yep. So this one would be Candida. And a lot of times you have Candida, you're craving bread or you're craving sugar is usually a clear sign of that one, or white on the tongue. All right, they also help assist with blood circulation. So I think that's cool. They're doing way more than just what we initially think of. So they help with the blood circulating throughout the body. They communicate with the immune system. So the way this works is we have our T cells and the ones that are working on the immune system, and it's kind of like those guys are in the trench, but you have to have a command center. And the command center is found in the immune system. So the command center is the one that calls out and says, hey, get that guy over there. Don't attack that one. Do this. That's the one giving the commands. So if you lose the species that are primarily responsible for giving the commands to your T cells and stuff, you all of a sudden can run into problems where your immune system starts attacking itself because it's lost the command center to tell it the difference. Okay? It also communicates with our brain, as we touched on before, and we have 5 times more nerves in the gut than we have in our spinal cord. Is that not amazing? Our good, healthy gut also acts as watchdogs, producing their own form of antibiotics, helping to keep us healthy. They also help to prevent cancer-causing chemicals from forming in the first place. And they regulate our bodily pH levels. In other words, our blood needs to be alkaline, but our stomach needs to be acidic. You know, we have different pH requirements throughout the body, and these organisms play a role in that. That's one of the number one things that bacteria organisms do is regulate pH, which is why I am careful with what probiotic I might choose, because if you have a probiotic that's coming from a cow, it's going to want, the job of those probiotic organisms is to bring back the pH needed for that cow. You see what I'm saying? And so my favorite probiotic is one that is made from human breast milk, because that's actually going to help work within our body. And I believe that's called ProGurt. So ProGurt, Progurt, should be ProGurt. Yeah, and they sell kits where you can make your own yogurt using that probiotic organism. So you're making yogurt, but the bacteria strains that are in there aren't just the 4 selected, like we had mentioned before, but it's actually coming from human breast milk. And you can actually set that up and make those, which is awesome. Yeah, you should be able to find them online. My local health food store has it, but I would look online. We can check even after class and make sure that you guys have found that resource. So good, healthy gut regulates hydrochloric acid production. So what does the word regulate mean? It's going to make sure if it's too high to bring it down, if it's too low to bring it up, right? It's going to regulate it. So why is this a huge deal? I think this is huge because I came across this quote in a book I was reading on fermentation. And it was by Dr. Warner Zabel, and his book was Internal Cancer Therapy and the Nutrition of the Cancer Patient. And he said, the presence of a cancerous growth is always accompanied by a lack of hydrochloric acid and enzymes. So for a doctor to say is always, that's very strong words. Very strong words. So he was very confident in this when he said it. It's always accompanied by that, a lack of hydrochloric acid. So if we go back on the previous slide, what does a good healthy gut do? Regulates hydrochloric acid, right? So to me, that is like very profound. And I actually have a testimony on that I'm going to give in just a minute. But before I do that, this is the thing that got me interested in gut health in the very beginning, this statistic right here, that 80% of our immune system is dependent on the beneficial bacteria in the gut. So that word dependent, that's a pretty strong word, isn't it? And I love this picture. It was worth buying an Adobe stock image for this one. Because what would happen if that red chain was not there? If that red chain disappeared? The whole thing would crumble, wouldn't it? And that's what's happening when we're dropping species inside of our gut. The organisms that live in our gut work in teams, and they each have jobs and roles to play. So if you think about a factory, what happens if all of a sudden you lose all the engineers? You know, maybe how well would the conveyor operator belt do in place of the engineers? Or what if they're all gone and all you have is a Salesforce team that has to come in and try to manufacture the product? You know, so 80% of our immune system is dependent on all of those organisms living and working and residing within our gut. So that's what initially got me excited. I'm like, this is foundational. This is the most important thing we could ever study. So here's my testimony. Nay. Her daughter, Josie, attended the class. I used to have an in-home class. Once a week, we met for 10 weeks to learn about diet and lifestyle change. She came, she went through my entire 10 weeks. She learned about fermentation during those 10 weeks. She went home, and later, her mother ended up in hospice. She had ovarian cancer. She was in hospice, and they said there's nothing else we can do. She was beyond the point of being able to take food by mouth, but she appeared to be in pain. So Josie asked the doctor, maybe she's having trouble digesting whatever liquid stuff they were giving her for food. And she said, could you give her enzymes? And the doctor said, well, I can't prescribe enzymes. You know, that's not in our practice. We can't do it. But then Josie remembered that fermented foods were rich in enzymes. And she had taken my class, so her refrigerator was actually full of jars that she had made. So she went home, she took them, she blended them in the blender, strained them, went and sat next to her mother's bedside at hospice, and took the bottle and sat and just drip, 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 drip into her mother's mouth. All she did is sit and drip. And after 2 days, her mother didn't seem like she was in much pain anymore. At the end of the week, her mother was eating. She said, can you take this catheter out of me? I can get up and use the bathroom. And at the end of the second week, they said, you're not qualified to stay here anymore. So they said, you need to go, let's find an assisted living or somewhere where you can go. Well, during those next few days while they were looking for a place for her to go, she said, let me just go home. She said, I feel good enough. Let me go to my own house. So she went home. And to me, the coolest part of this whole story was when she arrived at hospice, they asked her for her death wish. And she said, I want my body flown back to the Philippines so you can bury me next to my husband. Well, after this event happened, 6 months later, she was cancer-free, and she flew home to the Philippines to celebrate her 85th birthday party with everybody. And so that was just a phenomenal testimony. And I can't say that that's going to happen to you. I can only say that's her story. It's true. It really happened to her. I think a lot of it is because she was raised in the Philippines. She wasn't raised on the standard American diet. So when she came here, she got sick, but her body had a strong foundation, and I believe it rapidly recovered because of that. But it's an amazing story. I also had another testimony of somebody who was coming through my class, and they had a niece who was not functional. She couldn't form sentences. She couldn't communicate or speak. She had a lot of issues. And they took one of their kits home, and they started giving her fermented foods. And they emailed us like 6 months later, and they said, you wouldn't believe how different she was. She was communicating. She was making all kinds of advancements in her health, which was just really exciting. And we have had a lot of testimonies over the years, but your immune system is dependent on it. It's absolutely important. So let's talk about the things that damage our gut. The most harmful medication. And what's the system that we're ruled by today? Yeah. And we have to know that the enemy has his hands in everything. He's in every system that's around us. And even the diet fad system. We need to be going to Scripture for how we should eat, because they're telling us everything under the sun in that whole industry and all of its propaganda all the way around. So if we look at medications, this is from Dr. B from Fiber Fuels. He says 4 days of one of the top 3 broad-spectrum antibiotics can permanently destroy 9 beneficial species of bacteria. So you wonder, how did we get down to this number from 300 to 1,000? Well, I think this is our biggest problem right here. He also says that there's 269 million antibiotic prescriptions in the U.S. each year, and a recent study suggested that 23% were flat out inappropriate, while another 36 were questionable, which brings us to over half, right? Yeah, they alter the microbiota, they destroy intestinal lining, creating ulcers and conditions for inflammatory bowel disease and microscopic colitis. And if you take a look at that further, there's some people that are on medication like this, like think of acne medicine. They may be on it for years. And in acne, that's a problem of a gut imbalance. And so you're taking acne medicine that's going to make your gut imbalance worse, in the long run. In birth control pills, there's a lot of things that really over time can wipe out and deplete a person's number of species that they have. Ibuprofen, we have 30 billion doses per year in the United States of ibuprofen. And these also negatively affect and destroy gut species. Processed foods affect our gut, and quickly. It's been shown in studies that one meal will start making a shift in our diversity of species in the gut that we have, that ecosystem that we're trying to foster. And if you look at the statistics, if you increase 10% of your intake of processed foods, if you increase in your diet, you start eating 10% more processed foods, that has been equaled to a 10% increased risk of cancer and a 14% increased risk of dying earlier, just from the processed foods. And we live in a total processed food world. So diet is huge on maintaining your gut, and so you can definitely damage your gut by what you eat. So a lack of diversity from plant foods is the number one problem for gut species because that's what they're surviving on. So you're taking away their fuel, their life source. So lack of diversity from plant foods results in too little fiber in the diet and not enough variety of fiber. There's millions of different types of fiber. So if you're only eating a few different plant foods, you're not getting much variety for them. And so the good organisms are eating that fiber. That's food for them. So you're feeding them. So in other words, beans, for example, beans have what's called resistant starch, which works kind of the same as fiber. And 90% of the nutrition, the calories and stuff in beans, goes to feed your gut bacteria, not you. You only get 10%. The rest goes to feed them. So if we're not feeding them and we're not keeping them alive, they actually starve. So, and actually that's the definition, I'm getting ahead of myself, but that's a definition of leaky gut. Because if you're not feeding this strain that needs to eat this, and now you stop eating this, they starve, but before they die, and they can actually go extinct, before they die, they get desperate, and they want to eat anything they can. So they'll actually resort to eating the lining of your gut. So they'll start eating that lining, and that creates a tear, and now you can have all this endotoxin getting through into your blood supply, which is actually very dangerous because if you have all this toxic stuff that starts to get into your bloodstream, if you're nursing, that goes right to the baby. So then you end up with toxic milk. Okay, so that's one of the biggest problems is a lack of diversity from plant foods. What did Scripture say? Behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed, I should need to have that memorized. But it was all plant foods, right? And it was a large diversity of it. You know, now after the flood, we were allowed to eat meat, and I'm not saying that there's problems with that. There's some benefits to that. But if we want to feed our gut microbiome, they need fiber. That's what they need. Okay, so again, I was already talked about that. We allow that into the bloodstream. There's other things that can affect our collection of good bacteria, things like stress, which again is the gut-brain connection if you're really stressed. About what? Yeah, we're going to actually show some studies on that in a little bit. Yeah, so it's not good. But anyway, and then antibacterial products. A lot of people don't understand this, but the antibacterial soap, it has antibiotics in it. Okay, so when you're using that, I've looked up on several things online that says it will, some of them say it will, which I think is strong, but a lot of the sites said it can make you so that you're resistant to antibiotics because you're getting it all the time. So then when you need the antibiotics, your body's resistant to it. Okay, so an antibacterial product kills the good and the bad, right? So now you've killed the good and the bad, everything. Well, what happens now when I go and touch a germ? My good guys are gone, right? So that's not the right answer. If you want to, so, you know, what did they always did historically? Wash your hands with soap and water. You know, you can just be clean, but not be destroying all of those good organisms. Myself, I just keep an essential oil roller ball with me that will go ahead and take care of any harmful bacteria, but it'll leave my good guys intact, you know, instead. And then we also have this bacteria phobia that caused a huge problem. You know, we're way too clean. And we need all of those species from, you know, kids used to eat mud pies and dig in the dirt and all of that stuff. And it makes a difference on the collection of bacteria. So Dr. Ack's book on Eat Dirt was quite amazing, as he talks about this whole problem of us being too clean. And they actually did studies that showed one of the best things you could ever do for your child when they're a toddler is take them to New York and roll them down the subway. But he was basically just saying that, having a dog is really good, having pets and just different things, because the dogs will bring in other stuff, and it just helps to build your good microbiome. We don't want to live in this sterile environment that we've been taught to live in. That's not how we were created. I mean, think about them when they're journeying through the wilderness and they're living in tents and they're, they got the sheep and the animals and everything all around. How sterile was that? It was not sterile at all. So let's look at modernization. What are the things that has really wreaked havoc on our gut health? How have we gotten down to this 300 to 1,000? You ready for this one? So, in the late 19th century, the average life expectancy was 47. So we're doing much better than that now, right? Definitely. And I'm not going to argue that at all. My only thing is, Yah might have had a better plan, a more natural way to have done it than the route we took. And so the route we took, while we're living longer, has wreaked havoc on our gut. And we're seeing a lot of other things that people are now suffering from. Alzheimer's and dementia and the cancer and the heart disease are much higher than what they would have been years ago. So in his theory on the modern gene, a lot of things have debunked it now, but because of his modern gene theory, we had chlorine added to our drinking water. That negatively affects us. We developed the vaccines. Children today, the amount of rounds they get when they're little is unbelievable. We've improved sanitation. We began metal canning, so then people stopped using fermentation. We invented food preservatives, and penicillin was discovered. Then in 1928, women were encouraged to disinfect by douching with actual Lysol. Can you believe that? I can't, just horrified at that. And that was, almost 100 years ago now. And whatever the state, what is the word I'm looking for? The ecosystem, the state of your ecosystem, when you give birth, that's what your child gets, especially if they go through the thing. And so each generation, we're seeing a decrease and a decrease in the amount of species in people's guts. So we developed synthetic herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, all of the sides, right? And we added fluoride to our drinking water. Woohoo! And then in 1943, we bombed the whole earth with DDT, trying to wipe out disease-carrying mosquitoes. Did that work? No, it didn't work. And look, they didn't pay any attention to people being outside. There's pictures of people being on the beach. They just bombed the whole world. It was 1943, and they said, we're just going to go to war with the mosquito. And they started doing all this stuff. And, God has the answer. In Africa, most people get malaria 4 times a year. But at our training center, we teach them how to grow Artemisia and drink tea from it. If they have tea at least 5 times a week, they never, ever get malaria again. He gave us what we need in plants. We have what we need. So, and then we have antibiotics and hormones that accelerated livestock growth. So a chicken is supposed to take, 18 weeks? And now it's taking 6? Is that correct? Something like that? Yeah. We definitely, with all of those, and even the girls, historically, they didn't get married until they got their cycle. That was the sign she's ready to get married. So she would get her cycle around age 17, something like that on average. Today we're seeing girls as young as 8, getting a cycle, and that creates a whole host of other problems. So we created this antibacterial soap, astringents, industrial cleaning products. Steve and Joanna, my brother and his wife, they had a business where they would make food service for a school. And I worked for them briefly, and the coworker that I was working with told me she bathes her children in bleach. She was putting bleach in the bath water. She was so afraid of germs. So afraid of germs. And you wonder how many people are out there like that, Then we have food additives. They skyrocketed to having over 10,000 different types of food additives today, and they've yet to be tested on humans. They're testing them? Oh, yeah, they're testing them. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yep. So and then the pharmaceutical industry exploded with 1,500 approved drugs. And Big Pharma is the one that does the studies on these drugs. Okay? And we have 1,500 approved drugs today. Then plastic was invented. Now we've got plastic all over the place. And I encourage you, if you've never watched this one, A Plastic Ocean is a must-see for everybody. And I'm so excited that yesterday I mentioned Mully Family Farm, and you actually went home and watched it. Yeah. It was a really, really good movie, so we encourage everybody to watch these. That's what we do at our training center. When people come in for the 30 days, they learn about gardening and self-sufficiency during the day, but then at night we show documentaries like this so that we help to renew their mind. So when they first come in, they think, I can't be a farmer, I can't do this, I can't do that, and they have a small victim mentality mindset, and by the time they leave, they're a world changer. I can go home, I can do that. You know, who are the world changers in your group here? You know, I'm sure you have plenty of them. Let's go forward and let's restore. It's a restoration of all things. Our Father's kingdom is coming. You know, let's restore everything and get ready for this millennial reign when we have a restored earth. So we also have less physical exercise and time outside. We invented planes, trains, automobiles, TVs, computers, smartphones, video games, movies, and now the 5G, which I think 7G is on his way, right? All of these things have affected us. You know, I used to have one of those readers that would tell you how much emission you're receiving from electronic, and I didn't have that much in my house. But when I got in the car and drove around, I couldn't believe it. It was really high in the car. So I thought, that's interesting. And then we no longer go to sleep when the sun goes down. We're staying up, we have other activities, we're eating after dark, and all of these things just affect the systems of our body with the gut. And then, in 1994, we invented GMOs, so that's good. That arrived. Now plants can be blasted with herbicide while all surrounding life dies. Great. And then the World Health Organization said about glyphosate that it's probably carcinogenic to humans. And that was a quote from them. We need massive amounts of GMO soybeans and corn to keep up with accessible animal consumption. So we're just growing it like crazy because of the amount of animals we're eating. We spray everything, including ourselves, with chemicals, which is why women tend to get cancer more than men, because what you put on your skin, 70 to 80% of that makes it to your bloodstream. So I don't use anything on my body unless I can eat it. If it can't go in my mouth, it's not going on my body. Yeah. I don't use it because women suffer a lot more because of all those products that they're buying. And I'm going to go on a rabbit trail because I have to. I just think this is awesome. We are basically an animal, or what would you call us, a mammal? We don't need to shampoo ourselves. You know, what animal in nature needs you to come out and shampoo them? You know, and shampoo is a product that never existed. And once you start using shampoo, it strips the oils from your hair. And then your body, the oils get stripped, and your body goes, oh, I need to replace those oils. So it starts overproducing and trying to produce oils to put back into your hair. And it overproduces it, so then your hair starts to get greasy. So now what? I'm going to have to use shampoo again so I can get rid of that extra grease. It becomes this nasty cycle that you have to be dependent upon. So the more often you shampoo your hair, the more often you need to shampoo your hair, right? So who ever invented that? Let's create a product that nobody needs, and they'll become dependent upon it, and they'll buy it over and over and over again. Wasn't that genius? So, but it does affect your body. Think about that. If your body is not in that cycle, and now all of a sudden it's being stripped, oh, I've got to replace. It's being stripped, oh, I've got to replace. What's that being diverted from? The energy taken to do that cycle, right? So I'll just tell you personally, it's been over 10 years since I've shampooed my hair. Your hair it will regulate itself. And there is a process to wean yourself off of shampoo. All you do is go to YouTube and type the no poo method, and it'll give you the directions, or feel free to talk to me privately or text me and I'll help you with that as well. But it's so freeing. When I head to Africa, I don't even have to bring a toothbrush because I can just grab a neem stick when I'm there and brush my teeth. I mean, I don't have to pack anything, you know? So it's awesome not being dependent on all these products. So we also have a limitless food supply that constantly exploits our taste for salt, sugar, and oil. And we are subjected to propaganda with never-ending fad diets. Isn't that the truth? Yeah, that's the absolute truth. And a lot of junk science, too, attached to these. And people just, they believe it. Yeah. So let's talk about how is digestion impacted. So there's the statistic. A lot of times I don't give that till later in the lecture. So here's what it should look like if we look at the lining of our gut. Okay, we should have these tight junctions where that keeps them together really, really nice and tight. And located at the bottom of those, I don't have a pointer, but located at the bottom of those villi, at the bottom are like little factories that produce enzymes. And those enzymes would go up, and if we have like a multi-cell, like a sugar that's still together, as it comes across there, it's not broken down to its simplest form, so it's not ready to go into the bloodstream. So those enzymes will come up and they'll split it apart so that we have food reduced to its simplest form to go into our bloodstream. Okay? So when you drop species, the factory shut down because now you've lost your engineers or your whatever, and your factory shuts down. It's no longer producing those. Okay? And so then if you have the situation where those species that have gone extinct started chewing and eating holes in the lining, so now you've got tears. See the openings between the villi there? And you have those tears, and you don't have the enzymes to split food apart, you're going to end up with undigested food getting into your bloodstream, and which it can't be there. Okay, does that make sense? So there's two different problems there. One, you have the tears, the openings of the lining because of you starving off your species, and then the other one from the factory shutting down and not producing the enzymes to split it apart. So these factories, which I've already kind of talked about, you should have all these different people doing all these different jobs of these microbes, and without them, things are going to shut down. And you'll end up with digestion problem. So this must be the video. Let me see. Yeah, that's the video next. So do you have that tab ready? Oh, you don't? Okay. That's all right. So what I want him to do is pull up a video real quick. I'll just edit this out. That's okay. But I want you to see a video because, sometimes it's hard when someone's talking at you. Maybe you're not an audio learner, whatever. But if you can see it actually shown in a cartoon, I think it really helps to understand what's going on inside the gut. So that's why I think it's important that we watch it, because it'll help you see it, and it'll reiterate what I'm saying. Well, I can get a drink of water. Yeah. You'll see in the video where the bacteria are not being fed what they need to survive, and you can watch and you can see them. The bacteria is looking to make sure that no one's watching, and he starts eating at the lining of the gut. So you can kind of pay attention to what that looks like.
Actually, it's not even going to play from here anyway.
Oh.
There's no audio connection here. There's no audio connection for this video, even if I play it. Do we need to plug in speakers? Yeah, grab the mic, I guess, for now.
Quick question, and that is the
Artemisia?
Artemisia tea.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that.
Yeah, it's in the wormwood family, but it's called Sweet Annie. Yeah, Sweet Annie. Sometimes it's called Sweet Annua, but that's the same genus, yeah.
I am familiar
Okay. Yeah, because just wormwood might be good on parasites, but that one's specifically good for malaria. Yeah. And we can talk about malaria, you guys, while they're setting that up, because when I initially went over to Kenya, when I first got hired to become an instructor over there, and they were teaching about Artemisia, at night, the documentary that they pulled up was how the U.S. was at risk for malaria again. And I thought, how interesting is that I fly to Kenya and the documentary is about the United States. Yeah, I thought that was very interesting. And what it showed in there was the because malaria is a parasite, and we were using certain formulas to kill the mosquitoes. So they go around and they spray for the mosquitoes, and it may not be as bad here, but in Florida, they spray all the time. You know, we're so swampy down there. But the parasite adapts eventually to that formula, and then they have to change the formula. And how many times can you keep changing it before you run out of options, right? And the other thing is it's extremely expensive. So we happen to have the money right now, or we're making up the money somehow, or producing it to keep spraying, but that's going to run out, and there's going to be a time in which we can't keep spraying. And then when malaria starts, we're not equipped. We're not ready for it. It used to be, my brother got malaria a couple years ago on one of his mission trips. He didn't get it till he got home, and he couldn't get malaria medicine. Today you can, because you can't fly without getting it. So today you can get it, but it was a big problem back then. But I encourage everybody to have some kind of plant growing. Like, there's other stuff besides Artemisia that will kill malaria. But we have, this last 2 weeks, we've had several cases of malaria in Florida. So if there's people coming down with it in Florida, it can start traveling, right? Because I just came from Florida. What if I had brought the malaria parasite with me, right? So I think that's something as we go forward that we should start having those kinds of plants growing and available and ready, so that you also can, for now, since we can still buy stuff, you can buy Artemisia tincture. And then you can just take the tincture on a regular basis to make sure that you're protective against malaria. But just keep that in mind as we go forward. Artemisia is Artemisia. And the one that's protective against malaria, it's the variety called Sweet Annie or Sweet Annua. Okay, did you have a question? Yeah. Yeah, well, that's another one too. When we were dealing with COVID, isn't it interesting? They said it wasn't a parasite, but yet all the drugs for parasite worked. Yeah, so, yeah, I have not seen that. Yeah, you know, I would say that because just like, remember, we were taking ivermectin, and that's for parasites, and that was working. So I would say the odds, it would be logical, but I haven't seen the science. So I can't say that it will or not. I haven't seen evidence of that. And I haven't been taught that, but it would seem logical. But I don't know. It would have to be tested out to see. But yeah. You're going to try playing it?
Ready?
Yeah. See if I can sit out of the way.
Trillions of bacteria, viruses, and fungi live on or inside of us, and maintaining a good, balanced relationship with them is to our advantage. Together, they form the gut microbiome, a rich ecosystem that performs a variety of functions in our bodies. The bacteria in our guts can break down food the body can't digest, produce important nutrients, regulate the immune system, and protect against harmful germs. We don't yet have the blueprint for exactly which good bacteria a robust gut needs, but we do know that it's important for a healthy microbiome to have a variety of bacterial species. Many factors affect our microbiomes, including our environment, medications like antibiotics, and even whether we were delivered by C-section or not. Diet, too, is emerging as one of the leading influences on the health of our guts. And while we can't control all these factors, we can manipulate the balance of our microbes by paying attention to what we eat. Dietary fiber from foods like fruits, vegetables, nuts, legumes, and whole grains is the best fuel for gut bacteria. When bacteria digest fiber, they produce short-chain fatty acids that nourish the gut barrier, improve immune function, and can help prevent inflammation, which reduces the risk of cancer. And the more fiber you ingest, the more fiber-digesting bacteria colonize your gut. In a recent study, scientists exchanged the regular high-fiber diets of a group of rural South Africans with the high-fat, meat-heavy diets of a group of African Americans. After just 2 weeks on the high-fat, low-fiber, Western-style diet, the rural African group showed increased inflammation of the colon as well as a decrease of butyrate. That's a short-chain fatty acid thought to lower risk of colon cancer. Meanwhile, the group that switched to a high-fiber, low-fat diet had the opposite result. So what goes wrong with our gut bacteria when we eat low-fiber processed foods? Lower fiber means less fuel for the gut bacteria, essentially starving them until they die off. This results in less diversity and hungry bacteria. In fact, some can even start to feed on the mucus lining. We also know that specific foods can affect gut bacteria. In one recent microbiome study, scientists found that fruits, vegetables, tea, coffee, red wine, and dark chocolate were correlated with increased bacterial diversity. These foods contain polyphenols, which are naturally occurring antioxidant compounds. On the other hand, foods high in dairy fat, like whole milk, and sugar-sweetened sodas were correlated with decreased diversity. How food is prepared also matters. Minimally processed, fresh foods generally have more fiber and provide better fuel. So lightly steamed, sautéed, or raw vegetables are typically more beneficial than fried dishes. There are also ways of preparing food that can actually introduce good bacteria, also known as probiotics, into your gut. Fermented foods are teeming with helpful probiotic bacteria, like lactobacillus and bifidobacteria. Originally used as a way of preserving foods before the invention of refrigeration, fermentation remains a traditional practice all over the world. Foods like kimchi, sauerkraut, tempeh, and kombucha provide variety and vitality to our diets. Yogurt is another fermented food that can introduce helpful bacteria into our guts. That doesn't necessarily mean that all yogurt is good for us, though. Brands with too much sugar and not enough bacteria may not actually help. These are just general guidelines. More research is needed before we fully understand exactly how any of these foods interact with our microbiomes. We see positive correlations, but the insides of our guts are difficult places to make direct observations. For instance, we don't currently know whether these foods are directly responsible for the changes in diversity, or if something more complicated is happening. While we're only beginning to explore the vast wilderness inside our guts, we already have a glimpse of how crucial our microbiomes are for digestive health. The great news is we have the power to fire up the bacteria in our bellies. Fill up on fibers, fresh and fermented foods, and you can trust your gut to keep you going strong.
And is that turned off, that microphone? Okay, did that help a little bit to get a visual? A little? Okay. All right. So basically, when you talk about maintaining the species, you can think of it in terms of food groups. So in other words, if you have a kidney bean and you have a red bean or a pinto bean, you're primarily going to have the same resources for the species that are feeding off of that. But it's different than if you were going to feed yourself a banana. Okay? So you want to kind of keep it to food groups as your form of variety. So the problem we have today is elimination diets are huge. So people are saying, if you can't digest it, stop eating it. So you stop eating it, and especially if you eliminate entire groups, like you no longer eat beans, or you no longer eat grains, or entire food groups, you're dropping a bunch of species. And I talk to people all the time that decide to go on these diets, and they say, well, it's just for a little while. It's just for a little while. But your bacteria will be extinct in 2 weeks if you do that. And so, yeah. No, that doesn't include sugar. Yeah, sugar doesn't really have a lot of fiber. Yeah. Yeah.
What is the impact with like people doing 21-day fasts and different things like that?
Yeah. That's a very good question, and I'm quite concerned about that one myself. Yeah, because
Do you have any insight into maybe are we doing fasting differently than they would have?
yeah. Well, remember, if you look at the argument that they had, it was what? Should we fast on Monday and Thursday, or should we fast on Tuesday and Friday? Or, they were talking about what day of the week you should fast. Not a big, long, extended time. I mean, we have the miraculous times when Moses was without food for 40 days, but that was a miraculous time. I'm sure the Father also was sustaining his gut microbiome. But I would be concerned about a long 21-day fast myself, because we need to stop thinking about that we're feeding us, and we have to start thinking about, just like you take care of a garden, or you take care of a toddler, or you're taking care of something, we need to be thinking about taking care of our gut in the same way, because we have to keep them alive, and we have to keep them vibrant. And so we have to, yeah.
They had a different starting point too, probably. Like we're dealing with all of these external factors, and they
Right. Yeah, they maybe had closer to 36,000, and we're sitting here at 300, to 1,000. It's probably not a good time for us to be doing 21-day fast. Yeah, but there is a lot of benefit to fasting. I really like to fast on Mondays and Thursdays. That's what my husband and I love doing, and there's a lot of benefit to that. But in a long period, I wouldn't. To me, it doesn't sound like a good idea. Yeah. So and that's the other thing too. If you take a look at the carnivore diet or ones like that, they're taking fiber out. And some people stay on that for a long time. And we're going to start digging into what actually happens when you eat fiber. A lot of times people just think it goes in and it comes out and it just cleans you out on the way. But no, it has a very distinct role in healing your gut. And that's what I'm going to explain as we go forward a little bit more. So not saying that it's harmful to eat meat, but what's harmful is to eliminate all your fiber. You can't do that. You're going to run into problems. Okay, so this is my favorite doctor. And his last name is hard to pronounce, so a lot of people just call him Dr. B. But if I look at it, it's like Bulsiewicz. But he's a gastroenterologist. So he's working on the colon. That's his job. And he has all kinds of, butt and poop jokes, because that's his job, And he is great. If you read his book, he has so many studies cited on his website, so many studies cited. He said in the last 5 years, there's been 13,000 papers written about the gut and the microbiome. And if you look at the last 40 years, those studies that came out in the last 5 represent 80% of all the study done in the last 40 years. So it's really a lot of recent information. And he said the process that it takes from the time a study or a paper or a research thing was done until it's published and it's common knowledge with your regular doctor that you visit, it's going to take 17 years. And so he said, we don't have 17 years to wait. So that's why he put together, so he went and he got all of that and compiled it for us so that we could learn from it now and we could get better now. And if you go online and you look at the testimonies of the people who are getting well, it absolutely works. And I'll testify to it myself. When we first started studying gut health, which was like over 20 years ago, I remember being at a homeschool show with you, and a person came she had a white tongue, and she was on this big, long, unbelievable regimen that was so tough, and she'd been doing it for years and not really getting anywhere. We used to think that it took a very restrictive diet for at least 2 years to get anywhere on healing your gut. And now we understand in 24 hours you can have a shift start in your gut. And yeah, it's very, very fast. Yeah. Yeah. So, but the same is true if let's say you go, you have a fast food meal. You're having a shift and a change. Because have you ever studied the multiplication of organisms and how fast that is? It's huge. And so that's what's going on. Just 1 or 2 meals start to shift and change things. So it really is a daily discipline that needs to be done. But the good news is you can heal it quickly. If you follow the principles that he talks about that I'm going to give you now as we progress, in 2 weeks, if you're having trouble sleeping, in 2 weeks you can be sleeping like a baby. I mean, it starts to make a difference. It makes a huge difference. So I really, really, really love his book. I recommend it to everybody. And he has a 30-day plan if you don't have a lot of diversity in what you're eating. Sometimes people will say, every Monday we're going to have this, and, every Tuesday is Taco Tuesday, and and you just are having very limited variety in what you're eating. So you can follow his plan, but you don't have to follow his plan. If that's difficult and laborsome for you, just follow the principle, and you're okay either way. It's I don't know how to say it. I just say Dr. B. It's Dr. Bolshevitz, maybe? Yeah. So getting on to this leaky gut consequences, though, let's just go really quickly. I'm going to kind of breeze through this because I think you guys get the point and you understand this part. You don't absorb as much nutrition. You end up with autoimmune disorders. There used to not be autoimmune disorders, and now we have over 270 named autoimmune diseases. That's a ton. Thyroid dysfunction. How many people are suffering with thyroid issues? And I'll tell you what, I know doctors, like holistic doctors, that are getting people off thyroid medicine by increasing the amount of beans they eat. Beans are unbelievable because your body will take the spent hormones and stuff and it'll push it through the liver and it's ready to leave the body. But if you don't have the fiber from the beans to get it out of the body, it'll get reabsorbed and create a hormone imbalance and problem. So beans are super important. Cancer, allergies, stool problems. Stool is one of your number one. Dr. B, he says when they go in and they check your blood pressure and their pulse rate, he says they need to be checking your stools. That needs to be on there. And there's a great book out there if you want to keep track of your stools. It's called What is Your Poo Telling You? And it's a very good indicator to know what's going on in your gut, is to pay attention to your stools. It causes inflammation, of course, and then again, the mother's milk can become toxic for the child. So, and I had a statistic there. What did it say? Since 1950s, MS and Crohn's disease have increased by 300%. So that's a lot. And I actually had the privilege of assisting somebody who reversed MS by focusing on restoring their gut. So the role of fiber, this is where I want to get, because this is the key. So it's the plants really in your diet that fuel a healthy gut. So how many plants are you guys currently eating? There's a lot of people in this country that are eating 5 or less, 10 or less. I've been in the store before and I listened to a guy say to his wife, she was trying to buy something for making salads, and he said, I've got an agenda against salads I'm never having. Or so he says, I don't eat plants and all that. I'm like, oh, that's what was given to us. If we look at Scripture, that's what he gave us to eat. So this is what the U.S. Department of Agriculture estimates. We are eating 32% animal products, 57% processed foods, and 11% of actual whole grains, and those are probably biotech engineered, but 11% whole grains, beans, fruits, vegetables, and nuts on a national average. So 90% of everybody in the United States is consuming excess protein, 97%, but less than 3 are getting even the minimal amount of fiber, less than 3. So that's huge. And who talks about fiber? Fiber's the answer, and nobody's talking about it. I mean, seriously, we got to think about the propaganda that we're in, you know? So if we look at the blue zones of the world, that's populations that are living over 100, still being very productive, writing books. I saw a guy the other day, he's 115, went on for another career, still writing a book. But if we look at these blue zones, areas of the world where people live long and they're productive, they're eating 90% plant-based and 10% animal products. So that's the ratio that has worked for them. And there's so many studies that have shown that the more beans you eat, the longer you live. A complete direct correlation. And are beans popular in our culture? No, not at all. And if people say, well, when I eat beans, I can't digest them, I have all these problems with them, it's because of the bacteria that that survive off of those beans, that help to break down and digest those beans for you, they've been extinct. They've starved off in your body. But if you start introducing beans again slowly, give them a long soak. Like you could soak them 24 hours, and then you could drain the water and go another 24 hours in 1 second, and then cook them long and thorough and slow. Or you can even ferment them. I talked yesterday about a bread called idli, I-D-L-I, where you can actually ferment the beans. Or tempeh. Tempeh's fermented, and it makes my gut feel so good. But if you learn to do that stuff and introduce it slowly, the bacteria strains, the good guys, they come with the beans. Okay, so if you start eating the beans, you reintroduce the organisms you need to digest the beans. Okay, so you just start reintroducing them slowly, and then you can digest it again. Yes? Well, we want as much diversity as we can get. So the whole theme of this lecture is plant diversity, really. Anything. But black beans are really high in antioxidants. The more color you have, the present of color is antioxidants. So yeah, but just go for variety as much as you can possibly get. Yeah, but the easiest to digest would be your lentils. If you need to start slow and work your way in. The softer beans, the ones that you could sprout and eat raw, are usually a easier bean to digest. Like the harder beans, like soybeans, kidney beans, black beans, pinto beans, those are more your harder ones. You would never eat those raw even if you sprouted them. Those are the ones that would be a little more trickier to digest in the very beginning if you're reintroducing beans back into the diet. Yeah? Well, it would still have the fiber that your gut bacteria needs, but it's going to be a little harder to digest. So if you're not having issues with it, it's probably not a concern, but it is better. Like when you soak the beans, you're going to get rid of phytic acid. Some of the enzyme inhibitors and stuff would go away. But if you're not having issues, you could continue. I always give my beans a long soak, and so if I'm traveling and I have canned beans, they kind of bother me a little bit. And so it's just a personal more thing, yeah. You can, and there's some people use a pinch of baking soda. There's some other ideas that people have done out there. I generally just get busy and just do the water. Yeah, the only thing for me that I've heard is not to put salt in there because they don't get tender if there's salt, if they've absorbed salt at all. Yeah? Yeah, so soybeans help your body to produce more estrogen. Yeah, so there's some people that are struggling with that. They don't have enough estrogen, like polycystic ovarian stuff, they need more. And so soy produces a good thing for that. But, you have to be careful that it hasn't been genetically modified. And I'm of the opinion that the only soy you consume is what's been fermented or sprouted. Is of my opinion. But when I make my fermented tempeh, I can't tell you how good my gut feels. I mean, it's just awesome. It's awesome, but then it's fermented. Tofu is not fermented, okay? Tofu is just soy milk that you separate the curds and whey. It's also, but I love tempeh. But making tempeh at home is a completely different product. And then the stuff in the store will have a bitter aftertaste. When you make it at home, it's not bitter at all. And you can soak it in all kinds of different marinades and make sweet and sour tempeh. And there's even like a bacon tempeh. And they're delicious. They're really, really good. I love it. Yeah.
Just two thoughts. One on the water,
Yeah.
and that is it depends on the water that you're soaking it in.
Ah.
So that our hard water from our well takes more baking soda
Ah.
than the tap water.
Okay, very good point. So I'm going to repeat that so that it's heard in the audio. So he was saying it depends upon the water that you soak the beans in. So if you're soaking it in water or in hard water, you may need to add more baking soda so that you can compensate for that. And so,
The thing is that it doesn't just have to be soybeans.
correct.
It can be grains and other beans.
Yes, very good point. So he also brought up that you don't need to only make your tempeh from soybeans. And actually, it's two different starters. Usually, one tempeh starter is for soy, and one is for everything else. And so you can do that. And everything else is sometimes nice because the soybeans, you have to get the skins off, which I have found a trick for that. But yeah, tempeh, it's how do we say? You take the beans, or like he said, grains or whatever, and you have to add the culture to it. You cook it first, you add the culture to it, usually add a little vinegar and the culture, and then you put it in, like, traditionally you'd wrap it in a banana leaf. Some people use like a Ziploc bag, and then keep it at a certain temperature, and it will grow a fungus. So it's like in a mold family, but it's the mycelium. Yeah, it'll grow throughout it, and it's a beneficial mycelium, and it'll knit all the way through, so you end up with like this white cake all the way through. And that's something that you don't want to eat raw, but you can saute it and then, or boil it in some water, but then and put it in like marinades and cook it up, and it'll be, there's a little bit of a mushroom texture, but I think it's more like meat. It just has more of a meaty texture to it. It's just very, very delicious. But it produces B12, which is great, because it's actually a source of B12 if you eat tempeh on a regular basis. You get the B12 that you need. Yeah.
Different than the beans topic, but you mentioned the blue zones, and there's I don't know why that's there's a social media guy from Stockholm on social media that's been going around saying that like North Pakistan, they're living to like 140, 160 years old because they eat the seeds of the plants. So like if you eat an apple, you're supposed to eat apple seeds.
Oh, the seed along with it? Mm-hmm.
What's your thoughts on that?
I actually do that myself. I do eat the seed. I don't eat grapefruit seeds, but I do eat the apple seeds. Yeah. But yeah, people say there's cyanide or whatever in it, but you're having it at such a small dose, and a little bit can actually be beneficial for killing cancer cells and stuff. So yeah, I do eat the whole thing when I eat it. But yeah, it's totally proven. The more beans you eat, the longer you live, hands down, without a doubt. And the other thing about beans is they block the absorption of glucose. So they actually help you maintain blood sugars. And so we have a situation where people in developing countries are getting their bags, they might get bags of free rice, or they're just buying the white rice from the store, and they can't afford the beans. And so they're developing diabetes and stuff. It's just not good. Yeah?
When you said, you was talking about beans, and you talked about fermented beans, and you said that they add desirable bacteria. Is that both beans or just fermented?
All food comes with the bacteria that it helps to reintroduce the bacteria species needed for digesting that food. All foods do. Yeah, the species are living on the food. So you stop eating that food, and then that species is going to die out in your gut. But you start eating it again, and you can start to reintroduce it. And then if you continue to eat fiber, you'll keep it alive and keep feeding it. All right, so plant protein increases the growth of anti-inflammatory species while suppressing the destructive ones. So there's particular species, the one I said that'll go around and they'll put the fires out. When you eat plant protein, that actually that feeds them and encourages the multiplication of those species so they can start bringing down inflammation. And then fiber is the most powerful solution we have. So it's absolutely very powerful. Humans lack the ability to digest fiber without the gut microbiome. So we have about 17 different enzymes for digesting fiber, but the gut microorganisms, there's around 60,000 different enzymes that they have for digesting fiber. So the more we eat them, the more we keep them alive. The more we eat the fiber. So on this planet, there are 400,000 plants estimated on the planet. And I've heard between 100 and 300,000. Dr. B is in the camp that it's 300,000 of those plants are edible. So that's 3 out of 4 should be edible, right? That's a ton of plants all over. So our Father has given us so much already out in nature. And a lot of times if you get into wild edible study, a lot of times what you can do is just Google what are the top 5 poisonous plants in whatever state you live in, and the rest is probably going to be pretty good guess. You know, at worst, it might give you a headache, but if you've eliminated the ones that will really cause problems. And so that's pretty cool that the Father's given us a lot of plants. And so when the good bacteria eats the fiber, what they end up producing is small chain fatty acids. So each type of fiber consumed produces a different type of mix of small chain fatty acids. So here's the formula. You've got prebiotics, which is what feeds your gut bacteria, right? Then you have probiotics, which are the organisms themselves, the species that live in your gut. Then you have postbiotics, which is what they produce, what they give off, right? So almost everything is consuming something and eliminating something, creating something, all right? So this is the truth. We have prebiotics, that's the food coming in. The good guys eat it, and then what they do, what they make is small chain fatty acids. Okay, so if you eat fiber, the good bacteria is going to make small chain fatty acids. And why is that important? Because fatty acids, their job is to go around and heal and seal the lining of the gut. Okay? So that's the end result. You eat the fiber, and your gut's going to get healed. It's going to start healing the lining of the gut.
Do you find this in the Bible?
Well, we definitely can see in the Bible that we should eat plants.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's references for eating meat, too. But in the very beginning, he said he gave us plants, you know, and he did it all the way through. So a healthy, I think, for me, the meat is treat foods. So personally, we have meat at Shabbat. You know, to us, it's celebratory food. You know, that's the way we choose to deal with it in our home. We might have it throughout the week once in a while, but in general, we're trying to have 90% of that foundation, as much fiber as we can get in from our plants. And you want to make sure that you're eating enough food, too. You know, it's estimated that the average person should have 3 pounds of food, and I think that's what people struggle with when they get older, is they just can't eat that much. They really struggle eating, and so then all of a sudden that's when juicing and supplements start to come in, because if you're not getting enough in, you can't keep them fed. You can't keep them fed and keep the nutrients going. Yeah. And some of it, if you start working at it, you can increase the amount that you eat. But healthy bacteria can't survive without fiber and resistant starch. We talked about the potato guy the other day. Well, potatoes are a huge source of resistant starch. So he was also feeding his good bacteria when he did that. So eating fiber increases your diversity of species as well, so we can start to get more species in our gut. And this is the one that was shown 2 weeks on a low-fiber diet causes an altered gut microbiota. So it causes leaky gut just 2 weeks on a low-fiber diet. And isn't that what our entire society is all about? Low carb, low sugar, low, you know, and it ends up producing tears in the lining of our gut. So small chain fatty acids repair that. Good news. So you are not what you eat, but you are what your gut microbiota is eating. So foster them. So in summary, small chain fatty acids, they're vital for your intestinal health. They're the dominant energy source for your colon. They support a healthy gut microbiota. They repair leaky gut. And they reduce the release of that bacterial endotoxin getting into your bloodstream and circling around. Oh, look at this. They do more. They promote intestinal motility, which means they help get stuff moving through, keep on stuff moving. They decrease visceral hypersensitivity. What that means is for some people, they may have more awareness of stomach cramping or indigestion, things like that. It's like they're hypersensitive to those things. It helps to decrease that. It prevents food allergies and sensitivities. Do we have a lot of food allergies today in our society? Yeah, we have a ton. They help to regulate appetite and regulate your metabolism. There were so many studies shown where they did fecal transplants to save somebody. Maybe they had C. diff or something and they had to do a fecal transplant. But the person that they took the fecal from was heavier. They tend to be more in the obese category. And they implanted into somebody who was thin, and that person started gaining weight. And so they definitely there can be a direct correlation between weight gain and what is living inside your gut, which microbes are dominating there. But it connects gut microbiome to cerebral function. So your learning, your memory, your protection against Parkinson's. We're seeing a big rise today in Parkinson's and dementia. And so this would be an important one to work on our gut for. They also act as that crisis negotiator, that command center that's working with the T cells of your immune system. They help to keep the immune system working properly by giving out those commands. So if your genes load the gun and your lifestyle pulls the trigger, then small chain fatty acids disarm the gun and take it out of your hand. Okay? And how do we get small chain fatty acids? Eat fiber from much diversity as you can possibly do. So the Hunza tribe of Tanzania, they had 100 plus grams of fiber per day and over 600 types of plants in their diet. That's a lot, right? The American has 15 grams and 50 or less plants. So, all plant foods. Yep, anything that's plant foods, there's fiber in that. And so I was curious one time, how many plants am I eating? And I started journaling and writing it down. And I had my wild edibles and everything, and I got to maybe the mid 200s, and that's where I stopped. But it's something, and I remember being really focused on this, like, can I learn a new plant every week? And can I start adding the different types of plants that I'm eating? The Cherokee were known to consume over 2,000 plants in the course of a year. So that's a lot. And remember, we have up to 300,000 to choose from. So Abba's got an amazing creation, and we can really tap into that and make a difference with our gut health. One of the things I was thinking about with diversity yesterday, I taught everybody our daily bread, and just keep mixing stuff into your sourdough starter and put it on the waffle iron. Well, as long as you maintain at least 50% wheat or barley or something like that, you can throw other stuff in there and add to your diversity. You know, you guys had mentioned wild rice. Put some wild rice in there. You know, you could take, when wild edible season comes, I love to make acorn flour. Put some acorn flour in there as long as it's mixed. I see clovers all over outside. You can harvest those clovers, dry them out, grind them into flour, just blend them in a blender, you know, and stir that into your daily bread. Just keep putting everything into that daily bread to add the much diversity as you can possibly get. And that's just another way that you can do it. And, you know, don't just stop and make einkorn every single day or putting oats like I did yesterday. Well, put buckwheat in one day or put quinoa in another day. Put millet in another day. You know what I'm saying? Teft. You know, start learning and expanding your diversity of what you're eating to do that. Does someone have a question? I thought. Right. Well, exactly. There's just general rules that you follow with foraging. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. They say, 50 feet from a roadway, you know, at least, and stuff like that. Yeah. So I've got some crazy things that I've done. Like, a lot of the people in Africa are suffering from malnutrition, or, you know, they don't get the micronutrients that they need. And you can get that from grass. Like, you know, when we grow wheatgrass? We grow wheatgrass. Well, it's the same family as the grass that grows outside, you know, and all grass around the whole earth is edible. It's just we don't have the 4 stomachs like a cow to digest the fiber, but you can juice it. And your mouth is a juicer, you know, so I'm traveling in Africa and stuff, and I'm not getting any greens. I'll take handfuls of grass and chew it and spit out the cud, you know, just spit it out. And I was actually thinking yesterday about how cows survive on just grass, right? That's all, and the big animal, and they survive on it. But I was thinking about how grains are in the grass family. Isn't that neat? And grains are the fruit of the grass family. So really that grass family is supplying life all over the earth. And when I'm dealing with some of these people in Africa that have absolutely nothing, there's still grass growing around them, and they can at least not die from a malnutrition-related disease because Abba's given at least grass, But what we die of is a lack of knowledge. That's what we perish from, But he's given it. So, yeah, lack of knowledge. So here's another quote. 100 years ago, we used to consume 200 plants or so on a regular basis, and now it's 5 for most people. So here's our summary to tie this all up in a bow. We want you to live dirty and eat clean. When I work in the garden, I try to be barefoot. I love getting the dirt under my nails, because I know that's bringing good soil-based organisms back into my body, to try to replenish it. Remember that healthy soil equals healthy plants, which equals healthy people. So when you're gardening, you need to be all about soil building. And so constantly be building your soil all the time. And, and that will produce healthy plants. I love to teach on the soil food web and the organisms that live in the soil. And the parallels of what makes up soil is the exact parallel of what makes up us. It's so cool when you study it, and the exchange that's going on in the soil is so similar to what's going on inside of our gut and inside of us. And so if you look at the relationship that's going on in the soil, the roots of the plants have carbohydrates in them, and that feeds the soil-based organisms that live in the soil. And so they're feeding off of that, and in exchange, they manufacture vitamins for the plant, and they regulate the pH for the plant. So you're always trying to say, okay, what is our soil pH? Well, if you're fostering the organisms that live in the soil, they'll regulate it for you. They'll go and get nutrients, water, bring it back to the plant. Abba's systems are so, so awesome. They're amazing, and we have the same thing going on inside of us. So we need to take care of that garden that's dwelling within us. Use natural medicine whenever possible. My favorite one is Usnea. U-S-N-E-A. U-S-N-E-A. Usnea is everything except getting rid of parasites. And it's more powerful than penicillin as an antibiotic. Usnea. Yeah, do the research on it. It's a double tincture, so you have to learn how to do a double tincture on it. It's a little different method. So after it's done tincturing, you have to actually heat it, because some of the compounds can only be extracted by heat. Or find a place that sells tinctures and buy it. But Usnea is great. I keep that on me all the time because it's a great natural medicine for everything except parasites. Avoid processed and sugary foods. That's a common, we know that one. Eat beans every day if you can. The people that were healing their thyroid were eating 3 cups a day. That was the protocol for healing your thyroid, was 3 cups per day. And then eating beans, peas, or lentils at least twice a week. This is a study found to decrease colon risk cancer by 50%. Just twice a week. So, yeah, beans. Yeah, well, it's just the legume family, but yeah, that's what they found in that study. Isn't that amazing? Beans are awesome, and they're cheap. You can even get dried beans at the Dollar Tree. They're cheap, So eat fiber-rich foods from as many different plants as possible. The last one? Uh-huh. Yep, you good? All righty. And then, of course, we add wild foraging to it because that will increase the number of plants that we're eating, increase the diversity of species coming back into our gut. And then eat a wide variety of fermented foods. So a lot of times people get on a kombucha kick and that's all they're doing. Well, they all play a different role. Kombucha is the only one that has glucuronic acid, which actually helps to detoxify the liver. And so you don't want to actually be drinking it nonstop all day long. So you're keeping your body in this huge flush mode. But then sauerkraut comes along and rebuilds up the system. And they all play a different role, and they all have a different collection of species and organisms. So strive to do as many different types of ferments as you can keep going. Even if you can't keep all the plates spinning at once, then do this one for a while, now this one, and rotate through or something. Share cultures with each other if you can't keep them alive all the time, and just rotate around and start doing those things. Okay, so we've got your vegetables, fermented with brine, sauerkraut, condiments. These are just all different things that you can make using fermentation. You can, fermenting on ketchup is easy. Tempeh, the idli, I really love idli, that IDLI. You just got to go to YouTube and type in how to make idli. I love it. It's really, really good. You have your dairy ferments, the beverages. Ha! If I ever come, I would love to do a beverage on soda, a class on soda with you guys one time. But I forgot to tell you, this is so cool for making homemade soda. Do you know how simple it is to make homemade soda? All you have to do is make tea, whatever kind of tea you want. So, of course, if you have a sassafras root, you're going to get root beer, right? But you make whatever tea you want. And then just make it a little sweeter so that when you taste the tea, it tastes sweet to you. You just want it a little sweeter than normal, okay? Then take about a 1/4 of a teaspoon of sourdough starter and stir that into your sweet tea. And I'm talking like a gallon of sweet tea. So a gallon of sweet tea, and it could be dandelion root tea, whatever you want to make. You add your 1/4 teaspoon of sourdough starter, and then you let it work. Let it sit where it can have exposure to oxygen overnight or during the day, and then go ahead and bottle it. Put it in bottles and cap it so that there's no oxygen, and it will build up carbonation as those organisms eat the sugar. And you'll end up with a soda that's carbonated, but it has very little sugar and is full of probiotic organisms. And it's really fun to make birch bark and all these different kinds of sodas. It's so easy to do. And then, of course, your grains that we talked about, fermenting grains, and then making your own wild-caught wine and beer like we saw in Scripture, with the wine being so medicinal as a tincture. This is my favorite book for learning how to ferment. It's The Complete Idiot's Guide on Fermented Foods. That's my favorite book for beginning starters. And how are you guys doing? Can you take 5 more minutes? Yeah? Okay, so I'm not going to go through these because I have tons of slides on this section. This is the science behind fermentation. I'm going to boil it down so hopefully you can just get it here in just a couple minutes. All right? So we use salt. I'm talking about vegetable fermentation now. There's lots of ferments out there, but I just want to talk about sauerkraut and brine pickles, vegetable fermentation, okay? You add salt to water, right? You make a saltwater brine. What does the salt do? What the salt does is it makes the water unavailable to spoilage organisms at all. So if you think about it, if you make a compost pile, okay, if you go outside and you build a compost pile, you actually want your food scraps to what? Break down, to rot, to spoil, to actually turn it back into soil, right? But when you do that, you have to water it, right? You layer it, you water it, you layer it, you water it, okay? Because the organisms that cause that to break down, they're called spoilage organisms, okay? They have to have water. They, just like we have to have water, they have to have it. But if you take salt and you mix it with water, something happens and it makes that particular molecule of water unavailable to them. And it can actually be worse than them not being able to access the water. It can actually dehydrate them. And so they dehydrate out, which means they cannot multiply. They can't proliferate. Okay? They can't have babies. They're just stuck. Okay? They can't do anything. So the good guys don't mind that amount of salinity. It doesn't bother them at all. So the good guys start to proliferate. And when the good guys start multiplying and proliferating, what they do is they're giving off acids like lactic acid. They're giving off acid. They're going to bring the pH down. When the pH gets below 4.7, the spoilage organisms, They cannot live at all in that level of pH, and they'll just die, and then they're gone. And they're not there. And they can never live in a pH below 4.7. So if you have vinegar, do you need to keep vinegar in the fridge? No. Because vinegar is what? Anyone know what the pH of vinegar? It's around 3.5. Okay? So you don't have to keep it in the fridge. It's being preserved by the pH. Okay? And that's what happens with fermented vegetables. So once that pH comes down, those spoilage organisms are gone. So a lot of times people make their jar, they've got it fermenting, and 2 days later or 3 days later or whenever it should be done, and it has to be at least 4 days at room temperature, they're worried about tasting it. Like, is it done? Is it finished? Okay? So if I take my salad, or I'm going to shred up some cabbage for coleslaw or whatever, I'm going to go ahead and eat that salad. Do you think there's any spoilage organisms in that salad that I'm eating? Yeah, right? Because if I didn't eat the salad, those spoilage organisms would do their job to turn that back to soil, right? So they're already there. So that means that when I eat a raw salad, my body is already equipped to eat that percentage of spoilage organisms, and it's part of God's plan, and it's not a problem. Okay? So once we mix our salt water and we cover up our vegetables, though that same amount of spoilage organisms, they can't multiply. They can't have babies. They can't do anything. So that means on day 3, if you open the jar and you go to eat it, are there any more spoilage organisms than when you would have had that raw salad? No. No, because the spoilage organisms, they can't multiply. They're stuck. It's the same amount. So that you load your jar, and the very next day, you can take a bite. After that, you can take a bite. There's never a point that it's dangerous. Do you understand? Because the spoilage organisms are stuck. They cannot multiply. Okay? So yeah, well, you have to be careful. A lot of times, some of the stuff that's put out there is so that you buy their system. Okay? But this has been done all throughout history. And they didn't have these sterile environments. When I teach people how to preserve food in Africa, they don't have an airlock. You know? I mean, they don't have anything. This has been going on forever. Okay? And so the other thing that happens is if where you're fermenting it, if the temperature is too warm, you'll have yeast that can get in there, and it can produce like a white film on the top. And sometimes you can get like a black mold. It's different things like that can settle in there, right? That happens if you have exposure to oxygen and the temperature is too warm. But do you think they could prevent that historically? No, they just scooped the top inch off and ate the rest. So that yeast that settles in on the top, that calms yeast, that's not a dangerous yeast, but it makes slimy textures and off flavors. So it makes it like, it's not as nice, I'm not excited about it. Okay? But it's not harmful. Yeah? Okay? So.
I heard when we were looking at sauerkraut,
Uh-huh.
that, and this is a question that I have, we're just starting to do this. You just like let it set, you don't can it where it's sealing or do a hot bath, right? Because doesn't that kill the whole
It kills it, yes, yes. So
you
like,
just have it, and as long as it's underneath the brine.
correct. Yes, so if you make sauerkraut and you want to store it long term, as long as you keep it submerged underneath that liquid's a barrier from airborne yeast, okay? So as long as you keep that liquid on top, you don't have to put it in the refrigerator as long as you can keep it at a decent temperature. Like pickles, for example, I tried keeping them outside of my refrigerator, but my house was really hot. It was almost 80 degrees, so I ended up with alcoholic pickles. Yeah, but with sauerkraut is so stable. Dave and I we usually make 5-gallon buckets, and we'll put it under the table. We might leave it for 6 months, and it's just awesome. Yeah, just the same thing you would store your grains in. It's a regular food grade bucket, yeah. And then sauerkraut is one you can leave on the table next to your salt and pepper and butter, whatever you might have on your table for condiments. As long as you push it down, every time you eat some, you push it down so that liquid's on the top. You can leave it on the table with your salt and pepper, you know. You can either buy a weight, or you can use things like cut an onion in half and put that on there, or you can take several carrots and put that on top as a weight. You know, anything like that will work to keep it on top. So. Yeah, if you're going to add water, I would add salt water brine. Yeah, if you're going to add water. Sometimes your cabbage isn't very fresh and you have a hard time getting the liquid out of the cabbage and you have to add a little salt water sometimes. Yeah? Yeah, the ratio for brine is 1 tablespoon of salt for every 2 cups of water. Yeah. And when you make sauerkraut, you usually don't add water. You only add salt to the sauerkraut and massage the liquid out of the sauerkraut itself. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, well, if you add things to your sauerkraut that have a high sugar content, like beets or apples, carrots, that high sugar content gets very excited during fermentation and it expands a lot. So, yeah, like our system that we have, we designed our system so that the expanding liquid has a place to go. It can dump in the cup. It won't seep out and go on the countertop. But if you have a lot of beets in there and you filled it a little too full, it just might seep out. And people, that's one of our number one questions people would call when it's coming out of the jar, and I'm like, do you have beets in your jar? And then I always say, I'm sorry, but beets are a bloody mess. So you just don't fill your jars full if you've got beets in there. Yeah. But in terms of like, if you get a black mold spot, I usually don't eat that one. But that's never happened to me. But I think if I had a big black mold spot, I probably wouldn't eat that. And Scripture tells us when there's black mold, so that's one that I wouldn't eat, but I don't have any science to support you on that one. That's just my own personal. And it's never happened to me. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's some stones that will erode and some stones that won't. So, yeah, so you just have to do a Google search on which stones that is, because I can't remember offhand. But you just want the stones that won't erode. I've used like scraps from countertops. You know, people do the marble counter or whatever. Yeah, ceramic. What's that called? Granite. Yeah, granite. That works good, and put it in there. But yeah, stones will work. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that will probably work because when you use like those old German crocks that people used to use, those stones were like a ceramic kind of material like that I think would work as well. So, yeah, and so our system, you know, bottom line is you don't have to have the perfect pickler. This has been done all throughout history. So why do we promote it? The reason why we have it is because there's no babysitting. You load it, lock it, and you leave it. And so if you're gone for 6 months and you got sauerkraut in there, it doesn't matter. You know, and the other thing is ours is the only system that has proof of an airtight seal. So you actually, when you see the water pushing over inside that airlock, that's proof that it's under an airtight seal, because otherwise the water would just remain level. You know, pressure is building up because it can't get out because it's airtight, so it's going to push that water over. And it's kind of a nice indicator. If you have it on your counter, you can kind of watch what's going on with the airlock, because at the end of fermentation, the water tends to settle back down again, because it gets real aggressive and real excited, and then the pH just come down. It's pretty much done its job, and things kind of calm down, and you'll see that water settle out. But there's just no babysitting. You don't have to burp the jars every day. And so that's why we did it. It really helped people who are nervous about it to get started on fermentation, because there's just no babysitting. And we have a recipe book that comes with our kit. If you count the different variations, you could squeeze out 26 different recipes from that recipe book. So... And I forgot to bring them today, but I'll get them to Matt, and you guys can have those available if you want to purchase those. It's 2 sets plus the recipe book for $25. And you can use the set over and over and over again. Yeah. So does that help you understand how fermentation works, though? Yeah? Okay.
Just one. If you have time, and if you're studying included the relationship of the gut microbiome to the vagus nerve.
Mm.
I'd be interested in hearing what you have on that, but if it's not part of what you're
Yeah, I haven't done a lot of study on that. I would probably refer you to contact that Dr. B, and send him an email, or call his office, and because that's a very specific thing that I haven't studied out myself. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah. Yeah, so yeah. Well, for prebiotics would be the food that you're eating. And so that would be some of the best ones are apples, oats, potatoes, beans. Those are some of the best with fiber and resistant starch that your gut likes. And those are very easy to digest. Rice, good quality rice, you know. I like red rice or black rice, something that's unique, not mainstream. And get started with that. And then in terms of probiotics, probiotics, in my opinion, should be something that's done every once in a while, not all the time. Yeah, and so it's kind of like you're inoculating. You're adding the culture, you're inoculating. Okay, now go ahead and foster them and by what you eat, by the fiber, you know. And so that I usually take it at strategic times. That Progurt's my favorite because it's from breast milk. But there's some things that react, like I think it's small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, like soil-based organisms, you know. Or you could alternate. Take a little soil-based organisms, you know, one round, and then quit and do something different. Then a month or two later, do the ones from breast milk. Then, because you're trying to build diversity. You don't want to be same thing all the time, same, you know. You're trying to build diversity. So, you know, get your diet a lot more diverse. That's the most important thing. If I was going to summarize the entire lecture, it's plant diversity. That's the most important thing. But like for me, every time I come back from Africa, I like to do a dose of that probiotic from human breast milk because I've been out of the country, you know. Yeah.
One of the things that Christina was saying is, you know, we go to the store because that's what we know, and there's really not that much variety there. So
Right.
how would you suggest getting additional variety?
Yeah. So
Foraging class next week.
yeah, foraging is great, but you know, I really like Azure Standard. You know, really create a buyers club, and you know, where you guys pool together. Yeah. Uh huh. Ah. Yeah. Yeah. Or when you go to even if you just go to a regular grocery store and you go into the produce department, how many things do you walk by that you've never bought? Right? And you go straight to your favorite. So start say, you know, cassava. Maybe you've never ever eaten cassava. So okay, this month let's learn about cassava. And let's learn how can we prepare it and how can we fix it. And just start to add to your number of plants that you're eating. You know, Beto? Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's kind of the thing, we're not going to be able to be perfect. In the world we live in today, we can't be 100% perfect. We can try to get as close as we can, but we're in Babylon, you know, so all we can do is the best we can do. And so if you can afford to get organic versus conventional, that might be a good thing. And then is it really organic? Because there's a lot of mislabeling, you know? So you have to weigh all of that, and you have to pray it through. You know, you can Google the clean list. You know, some people swear by that, some don't. Some have issues with it. But like, so the top 10 clean ones, could buy conventional according to that. But I think the bottom line is we have to start getting back to being self-sufficient. You know, whatever pace we can do, a step at a time, and work together at it. And, you know, maybe if one person's growing this, then you can grow that, and then you can swap. And, you know, whatever it takes to start that journey back. Abba is not blindsided by this. He knows we're living in this mess. And he's about to come and rescue, you know, and to regather us. You know, but in the meantime, we just need to do our best and try to research one thing at a time, you know. And Azure's great because you can actually get those. I think, isn't that, to me, that's just another sign of the enemy, that when you go to the store and you can't find whole oats and you can't find einkorn and you can't, look what he's trying to do, you know, just keep it from us. But luckily, we live in a country where we can just go to another source. We can go to Azure, and we can learn to grow these things, and we can learn to start making a change, you know, over time. And we probably don't have that much time left to tarry, you know, but we just got to be faithful until the end. And I really think that this, all of us here, this coming back into this walk, I think he's training up the leadership team for his millennial reign. And so let's focus on that. You know, we want to work better at this, but what we really want to do is be aligned with his agenda. Where is he at today? What's he doing? You know, and because if he's about to return and set up a millennial reign, and when he sets that millennial reign up, there probably won't be a Walmart down the end of the street. You know, and so he's trying to get his people back to his agrarian lifestyle. That's what he set up, was an agrarian lifestyle, right? I think about Abraham. Abraham, he told him, look before you, all that you see. I give this land to you and your descendants. And he had all this land. And what did Abraham do? He could have went out and he could have built a big city and called it the city of Abram. Right? He could have. But he didn't. He built an altar, praise Yah. He built an altar, and then he went over here, and then he went over there, and he sojourned all throughout the land. And he lived in a tent. You know, he lived simple. He lived in a tent. He lived off the land. He probably understood the wild edibles, and they had their animals and their other things, but it was a simple life, you know, and they had that diversity. And I think he's trying to bring us back to that and get us out of that Babylon system. So the more we get trained and the more we get prepared, it's just more that he can make use of in the millennial reign, you know?
The land, we've talked about this here before, but the land is actually the well. It's the, like, we even talked to the kids a couple weeks ago. It's like, do you want a stack of gold or do you want a plot of land? And they all said, we want the land because you can grow as many apple trees as you want. Or
Yeah.
it's actually, that's the production. That's the inheritance that we have.
Yeah, I know, and in my heart's desire is to have land. You know, here I am teaching self-sustainability, you know, all over, and I don't even own my own land, you know, and that's my heart's cry. It's like, Abba, I just wish I had land, but I want your will, and I don't know. What if he's coming next year? Then what does it matter if I have my land, right? You know, I don't know. So it has to be his will in all things. But if I ignore him returning and don't think about that factor, I would say I would almost rather cash out my retirement and buy land, because the land, I could live without money. I could live without the need of money. You know, and I wish if I could redo my life, I would make obtaining land my number one goal. And I didn't understand the value of it. You know, but I do now. Without that, it was seed banks. Do you guys, as a Shabbat group, do you have a seed bank? Well, who's going to run with it?
Something we talked about last year, yeah.
Yeah. Get yourself a seed bank. Especially, we know the enemy's agenda is to change our seed, right? So if he's changing the seeds, you better be cultivating and preserving the heirloom seed, the true seed that was his creation. You know, everybody should have their own home seed bank, and then you should have a community seed bank. Yeah, and the knowledge of how to preserve your own seeds, too. Oh. Oh, yes. Amen. Well, I want to bring up one thing that I mentioned to Laura earlier that I thought you guys might also appreciate is, historically, they made sauerkraut, right? Big barrels, bunch of it. But they did something else that I think is really cool. They took big barrels and they'd fill it with the salt water, and they would just throw the whole head of cabbage in there. Just throw the whole thing in there, you know? And then, yeah, just don't do anything. Just throw it in there. 6 months later, that, you know, those tight leaves on that cabbage head, that's all just stayed preserved, but it's still raw, unpenetrated inside the cabbage head. So 6 months later, you pull the cabbage head out, peel off those outer leaves, and you've got a raw head cabbage you can shred for coleslaw, whatever you want in the winter times. And that's just another awesome thing to do if you don't have time to make sauerkraut. Yeah. So anyway, did that make sense today? Do you guys understand how you need to foster your gut? Okay, so I think of that as a rainforest now, and the multiplication of organisms, and really what you eat makes such a difference. We got to take good care of them. Yeah. So, well, if you have any more questions, otherwise I'm done with what I planned to bring for you today. So, okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you. You're welcome. You're so welcome. I love coming. I'll be here again in September, so if you guys want me to teach on something else.
Well, thank you. What area are you from?
I'm from Florida.
Florida.
Mm-hmm.